This is the third time I've tried to record this particular section of the course because I'm struggling to articulate it. And that is because my exit from Christianity and my deconstructing of my own faith didn't follow a clear, linear timeline. And there wasn't like one solitary moment where everything flipped and changed. It happened slowly, incrementally, over time. And it was a process of a complex assortment of influences, things that I read and watched and listened to. Some of that time while I was still calling myself a Christian, and eventually somewhere along the way, probably around 2018 or so, I think I finally got bold enough to publicly, outwardly say to the home group, the Bible study group that I was still attending with my wife at the time, and say, guys, I don't think I'm a Christian anymore. Didn't know what I believed at that time, at that point. Was still trying to figure it out, but was just on a search very much. But enough things had fallen away that I could no longer in good conscience identify with the title of Christian, and wanted to put some distance between myself and that title and the associations that go with it. One of the authors I started reading that was incredibly helpful at that time was Richard Rohr. So not everyone's going to resonate with him. It's fine if you don't. It's fine if you already know who he is and you don't like him or you disagree with him or whatever the fuck. I don't care. He was helpful for me. And everybody's path is going to be different. And there are going to be other authors or podcasters or speakers on YouTube or whatever that resonate with you. It's fine. But I really liked the way that this guy spoke, both in his books and on podcasts. He had a gentleness and a kindness of spirit that had so much compassion. There was no arrogance and ego in his message. He was incredibly patient with difficult questions. And he was saying things that were pretty radical for him to still be under the Catholic umbrella. And that appealed to me, that he was controversial among his own group, because he would talk about things like, we are literally not separate from God. God didn't create everything. He is everything. And therefore, we are divine. We are literally a part of God. And at the time I was like, boy, I don't know about that. You know, there was a moment when that seemed like a radical thought to me, seeing inanimate objects or animals or plants or outer space, any given thing, seeing breath itself as God, as the essence of God in another form. That was a radical idea at the time, but I sat with it and kept thinking about it and was curious about it. And he would also talk about seeing everything, therefore, as sacred. If everything is God, then everything is holy. Donald Trump's spray tan is holy. Your child is holy. A piece of cake is holy. A blade of grass, a drop of dew, a flower, the clouds, your breath, your eyes, literally everything under one view is holy, divine, sacred, part of God. And so I was like, all right. I mean, if anything, it was new information. If anything, it was a new perspective that for a long time, I just rolled it over in my brain. I would just think about it during the day. I actually stopped reading my Bible and started just reading this because it was such an encouraging and helpful, inspiring, profound, and intelligent document that it played a crucial role for me at that time. So then some time passes. Then I start exploring other world religions and kind of finding books almost synchronistically at the right moment in time, finding something at a thrift store randomly that would have never even fazed me or that I never would have even noticed. And all of a sudden I find it. It's like it stands out to me on the shelves. And even though I know nothing about it, I decided to get that book. In this case, it was the Essential Kabbalah, which at the time I knew nothing about Judaism other than like the ultra basics, and definitely nothing about mystic Judaism. And even the word Kabbalah is used by Hollywood as like, an evil cabal. It's always this like Freemason hidden society, secret underground group of evil people doing a ritual that controls the world or something. it's got a negative context in popular media. But so I was like, I don't know, let's try it, man. And so this book I read, and first of all, I'm surprised by how much of it I resonate with. Growing up as a Christian who, and the Christians I was around had an utterly dismissive attitude towards Jews as a faith, that they were like, nope, those guys are dead wrong. You know, they deny Jesus, and so therefore everything they say is off the table. They're idiots. They think Abraham is literally going to come sit at their table someday, and like they're not saved and they're going to hell. And like Judaism is the dumbest thing ever, but we have the right, you know, the attitude of the Christians I grew up around. That's how they talked about Jews. And so I was like, okay, start reading it. And again, there's this idea of God being in everything. The language is different. The context is different. The way that it's described is a little different, but their whole thing is there is the Kabbalic tree of life, and their way of kind of interpreting it, or their way of describing this phenomenon, is that God started as one point of consciousness, one point of awareness, and then it fractaled out to two, so that there was two awarenesses of the same essence, and now they were looking at each other, that they were aware that they were looking at each other, and that those two made a third. And so that now there's three. And so then from there, it just fractals out into everything that exists. Some people associate this with the Big Bang of one point of energy that fractaled out into infinite constellations, into infinite multiplications, and it became everything that we have now. That's a mega simplification, and that's not all that Jewish mysticism is. It encompasses a lot more than that. But essentially, the idea was still oneness. Everything emanated from one source, and that therefore everything that is still has an essence of that original source. Everything still has God in it. So at this point in my journey, all I do is notice that association. It seems pretty clear, actually, even though the vocabulary is different. The association between Richard Rohr's words and Jewish mysticism are like kind of saying the same thing when you boil it down. Then I happen upon the Bhagavad Gita. I was basically, just trying to hit all the major world religions, to hit these kind of major texts and see what was there. Was just curious about it. And the Bhagavad Gita is more in a story form, more like a long parable or a poem, in which this dude named Arjuna is asking questions of Krishna, the deity Krishna, who has manifested into material form or incarnated into physical form temporarily to talk with Arjuna. And when one reads the Bhagavad Gita, you're supposed to view yourself, the reader is Arjuna, because the nature of the questions that he is asking, God, Krishna is a manifestation of Brahman or God, and it's basically Arjuna trying to understand the nature of the universe. He's asking all these questions about right and wrong, about morality, about death, about spirituality, about how to view the world. And Krishna is very kindly and almost playfully answering him. And the things that Arjuna is worried about, Krishna is like, in a very kind way, he's just like, that's so silly. What you're worried about right now has nothing to do with anything. And that once you realize the full truth, that question will seem ridiculous to you. It won't matter at all. And again, this book has a thread of God in everything. Within Hinduism, and perhaps more particularly Advaita Vedanta, which is like a branch of Hinduism, all things are manifestations of Brahman. Brahman is just their name for God. All things are manifestations of Brahman, appearing to be separate, appearing to be individual separate things, but that they are all one thing. And the only reason that we see them or experience them as separate is because of what they call Maya, which is the world of illusion. This is all Maya in their belief system. This is all an illusion, and that we are actually God experiencing everything, including this lamp and this book and this wall, this wood, this jacket. Even inanimate objects are material form, that there is an essence, there is an energy, there are nuclei and atoms, and there are pieces of energy holding all of this together, that the whole universe is made up of the same stuff in different density and in different vibrational form. And in the Vedanta view, all of that is manifestations of Brahman. It is all God experiencing itself through all of these infinite, vast things. Why is that? Because God wanted to see what it was like to be everything, to live as every person that has ever lived, to live as every animal, to have every single experience of pain and joy and pleasure and suffering and death and torture and incredible bliss and every possible fractalization, every possible combination of experience that can be had. God wanted to enter into form to experience that, because to simply be one that knows everything and that there is no other, that over a certain period of time gets boring and uninteresting. And so I like that the Hindus call it an act of divine play. God wanted to play. So he created all of this. It created all of this. It became all of this. This, of course, is just one way of looking at it. Okay, I've already spent too much time talking about texts, but the last one I will mention briefly is the Tao Te Ching. This is a religion or a belief system that dates back to as early as the 4th century BCE. And again, here I find in this text, the essence of it, the main theme is that the Tao is an energy force that flows through everything, even though it's using different language, different vocabulary, different group of people, different culture, different time period. Essentially, the essence is the same. I'm mega distilling all of this down. This was a process that took place over the course of a couple of years, and there were many, many other things that I read. But essentially, what started to happen was just that it went from being open to a new idea to eventually morphing into starting to see the world and my own experience and all of life through this different lens of taking a omnipresent, omniscient creator God off of the throne and realizing that that was just the fabrication of humans over time, that they created this basically, and they wrote texts about it, and that even the span of history of everyone who has ever written about or believed in God has kind of added to this egregore, this idea, and made this thing in a certain sense real. But then once that was gone for me, and I started to view everything as just a manifestation of life in a different form from the same essence, the more that that seemed to make sense, the more that that felt true. And it is crucial to note that one of the biggest parts of this whole process for me that was happening simultaneously with leaving Christianity and reading and studying and learning about all these other ways of viewing reality was that I had begun to meditate. I think it started in like 2016 or so. I started super small. I got the Headspace app and I was doing, I think, literally 3 minutes a day, listening in my earbuds, doing these guided meditations. I would take a break at work and step outside and close my eyes and breathe and listen through guided meditation. This was when I was still calling myself a Christian. And I was basically looking at meditation through the lens of like mindfulness, of like, hey, it would be good if I slowed my brain down for a few seconds and tried to relax my body and just feel calm. And I really liked it. I liked it immediately. So I kept doing it. And I built up to more and more time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20, 30 minutes. Eventually, somewhere along the way, after months, I just dropped the app and started doing silent meditation on my own. I didn't have a mantra. I never got into the transcendental stuff. I just kind of intuitively went towards the way of doing it that made sense to me, that felt effective and helpful, so that then I was getting up at 6 a.m. before work and making coffee and then just sitting, legs crossed on the floor on a pillow and breathing with my eyes closed for 30 minutes. At this point, it was still completely from a kind of materialist view. I didn't think of meditation as anything spiritual per se. I viewed it as a practice to just calm my brain down and to kind of start the day with a sense of calm and ease. And it did help. It did help me feel more patient at work or with frustrating situations, socially, whatever. I felt less irritable in traffic. I felt less activated by confrontational moments. Everything kind of started to just calm down, and things that used to get a reaction out of me, used to get a trigger response or whatever, kind of calmed down. But then when I start reading these texts, especially the Hindu stuff, Hinduism is big on mantras. They have mantras for everything. They have these little holy songs or prayers for all the deities, and mantras that you can say if you need money, mantras for healing people, mantras for all kinds of stuff, everything imaginable. And the whole point of a mantra is to give your mind, your monkey brain, something to focus on and repeat over and over. You kind of give it this very repetitive motion so that your brain can focus on that. And then it's not thinking about all the things that you have to do in that day. It's not stressing. It's not reverting back to memories. It's not thinking about masturbating. It's giving it this little engine, giving it something to do so that then your body can fully relax and you can start to sink into the really deep, beautiful, juicy parts of meditation. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to articulate this because it's such a nuanced and subtle, strange thing to describe. But basically, over the course of about 4 years, meditating very regularly, almost every single day, very rarely missing a day, while I'm reading all this other spiritual stuff, what started to happen is that I was having essentially mystical, spiritual, otherworldly experiences while completely sober, while doing nothing except breathing with my eyes closed. And at the beginning, I would kind of doubt these experiences. Some of them were very vivid. They were like visions, or they were like I was being taken through a guided story or journey or experience in my own mind with my eyes closed. And the nature of these things, these experiences, were so completely outside of my frame of reference, being shown aspects of existence that are almost impossible to describe. And so at first, I just kind of dismissed these as like, oh, I was just thinking about some weird stuff. I'm a creative individual. I have a wild imagination. And so I was just like, it's just something I imagined and didn't think of it as much more than that. But then, not only do I start having extremely vivid, lucid dreams and being visited by entities and deities and angels for which I had absolutely no framework. And these dreams were sometimes so incredibly vivid that they frightened me. You know, in the Bible, a lot of times when an angel shows up, it says, be not afraid, because angels are fucking intense. They're frightening. Doesn't mean they're bad or malicious, but they are an entity that is living on a different fucking energetic wavelength than you and I. And when they show up, it can feel like getting your fucking hair blown back. So I was having these vivid dreams that I had never had before in my life and was being visited by goddesses like Ishtar or Inanna or Babylon and being like, who the fuck is this? I had an extremely vivid dream about Ishtar and literally had to wake up and go Google who that was. I didn't know who the fuck Ishtar was. And it's like, why is this Assyrian goddess who was worshipped thousands of years ago showing up in my dream? It was too precise and specific and vivid to be just a random thing that my brain was doing. I was being introduced to something new and shown something, a different wavelength of existence was being introduced to me because that particular piece of information was like a guide to take me further down this path. And it got to a point with the meditating where basically every time I sat down in the mornings to meditate, I was being shown some vision or another, or I was being taken on kind of an adventure in my own imagination. And these experiences were doing a number of things. They were, in some cases, helping me revisit moments in my own past and work through trauma and validate my younger self for things that I endured. But a lot of times I would see myself in Bible times and be interacting with a lamasu, which I'll put a picture of because I can't describe it, but these entities that are carved outside of temples in the Middle East from ancient times. And like so much of this stuff I had zero context for. This was outside of my culture, my time. I had seen it here and there throughout my life in random places and never thought anything of it. But basically, I was having and have continued to have since that time essentially mystical, spiritual experiences. And this process essentially started to show me that this reality, this existence, this life, this universe is incredibly strange and bizarre, and that the things that were happening to my own body in my own mind were stranger than anything I have ever encountered before. And thank goodness that I had the context of these texts, because this all kind of fit together in this really abstract and complicated puzzle. It all made a certain kind of sense, because if everything is God, if everything is divine and holy and spiritual and from one source, then what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing in my own mind that feels supernatural, I came to recognize that all of these things are just representations of the whole, and that I was being shown and taken through these experiences with particular entities because they embodied a piece of information that I needed to learn at the time. It doesn't mean I became devoted to that deity or start worshiping angels or whatever the fuck. It's just that that came to me at the right time so that I could understand that piece of information and then move on. And all of this was opening me up further and further so that I could understand that all of this is one thing. And please hear me when I say that I started this journey as such a skeptic. Even when I was leaving Christianity, I had never really had any spiritual experiences. I had never had anything in my life that felt like God was talking to me or felt like it was miraculous or out of the ordinary. I lived a really plain Jane, normie life. So I was viewing my own experiences as a skeptic. I was reading these texts as a skeptic, at least to start. I was like, this is fake. This is pretend. This is dumb. This is made up. It's all bullshit. For a period of time, I had that attitude. If you are hearing all of this and this sounds absolutely crazy, I understand. If you think that I am mentally ill and disassociated from reality, I understand. And I am just asking you to be curious. Continue to just be curious. If you follow this path long enough, I do believe that these things will open up for you, and that it will be such a delightful relief to shed the chains of how you used to see the world. It's honestly an incredible adventure. It's wilder and stranger and more bizarre and more exciting than you could ever fathom. It is like living a fucking movie, and you will experience things in your own natural body that you probably never thought were possible. So keep going.